Okay. Welcome to the Monday, September 9th, 2024 council meeting. Happy end of summer and back to school. I would like to acknowledge that we are gathering on the unceded traditional territory of what is now known as the Comox Nation. I spent the morning rescuing fish out of the bottom of the Perseverance Creek, and at the time we were releasing said fish into the lake. We had a conversation about what it would have been like prior to the dam being there and the nation's use of that land. And so just reflecting on that today as we appreciate the beauty of Cumberland. Could I have a motion to receive the agenda, approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Second, all in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried. Minutes, adoption of regular council meeting minutes, July 22nd, and advisory planning commission, August 8th.
Move minutes. Second.
Thank you, and all in favor? And that's unanimous as well. And we have a delegation from the CVRD on a housing needs report. Alana, what? There they are, over there. Coming in on, streaming in online. Welcome.
Great. Thank you very much, Mayor Brown.
Thanks for being here.
My name is Alana Mullally, and I'm the General Manager of Planning and Development Services with the Comox Valley Regional District. And I'm here today with our consultant to present information on the final 2024 housing needs reports that we've undertaken across the region. And tonight, of course, the specific focus is on the Villages report. Together, this report with reports for Courtenay, Comox, and the electoral areas, the project updates our 2020 housing needs work and fulfills our shared obligations to assess housing needs and supply under the amended Local Government Act. Cumberland's report, of course, was also commissioned by village staff as a necessary companion to the village's ongoing official community plan review. These reports, you'll recall from reviewing them in the past, are intended to provide a picture of the current and anticipated housing conditions across our region. And each report includes community-specific data on community profiles, so demographics, for example, your housing profile, construction, rental, and market housing, as well as housing need and a gap analysis. The regional report supplements these, the village report, the other municipal reports, and the electoral area reports. And that regional report will come forward to the board tomorrow on September 10th. As I say, tonight's focus is primarily Cumberland's work. And with that, I would like to turn the delegation over to Andrew Scanlon-Dickey. You will remember Andrew from the good work he did with us back in 2020, and again when he presented to you earlier this year with the draft report. Andrew is the Division of Planning Manager with Turner Drake and Partners Limited. And I'll turn it to Andrew to present his findings and analysis and respond to any questions that you might have. Thank you, Mayor Brown.
Thanks, Alana.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Alana. Yeah, so many of you probably remember me from, I believe, May when I gave my last presentation about the housing needs report. At that time, it was in more so draft format. Since then, we've been working on some updated numbers, more so related to new releases from the province in relation to population data, as well as household data. And then most importantly, in June 2024, there was a release of new requirements for calculating housing demand over the next 20 years. So this presentation is going to be a lot like the last one that you saw with new numbers. We've also sprinkled in a couple portions in it that speak to the Village of Cumberland in the larger picture of the CVRD, just to have that comparison. But that said, if there's any questions at the end of this, I'm more than happy to answer. I'll be going through some topics a little bit more quickly, so I imagine there might be some questions about more like clarity about terms, etc. So Yeah, so Alana gave a great background in regards to, I guess, why we're here. So I won't spend too much time on this slide. The most important thing to recognize is that, so the first legislative requirements for housing needs reports were first introduced in 2019. And so that's what spurred the last iteration of these reports. So you would have had the last one in 2020. And Cumberland and the CVRD actually commissioned new reports prior to new amendments coming in late 2023. And so we're here today a little later than anticipated because we actually wanted to make sure that we were meeting those requirements. And so the biggest thing as part of those new requirements, and I mentioned they came out in June 2024, was that communities must now use a standardized approach, which is known as the Housing Needs Report Method, to identify 5 and 20-year housing demand, among a couple other less technical requirements, which you will see eventually in the report that's going to come forward through staff. So today is more of kind of like the primer for what you will be receiving in I suppose a couple of weeks' time. So like last time, I'm going to speak a little bit about the state of the market, so where it's been over the last few years in terms of prices and availability. Then we're going to go into a conversation about some of the demographics and how they've changed over time and how they might change into the future. And then lastly, we'll have that conversation about demand. So what you might be looking at in terms of required output over the next 2 decades. So when we talk about home ownership, so Cumberland has experienced sustained housing price appreciation since about 2016. So that means that there's been an increase in price before, during, and after the pandemic. So to illustrate, from 2016 to 2019, house prices in Cumberland rose 54%. And then in the preceding 3 years, so 2019 to 2022, there was an increase of 58%. So in 2022, the median house price for Cumberland was about $788,000, up from about $498,000 just 3 years prior. So comparatively so the median CVRD purchase price was up 64% since 2019, but this reflected quite a significant change from the 3 years prior, almost doubling the rate of growth. So what Cumberland is facing or has faced is much more sustained, as mentioned, increase in their prices. So this worsening of affordability has been more acute or has been occurring for a little bit longer period compared to other communities within the CVRD. That said, when we're talking about affordability, it's important not to only look at the change in prices, but also to consider how the change in incomes and the change in mortgage inputs have changed at this same time. So for instance, if we compare how incomes have evolved over the last decade, we can see using prevailing interest rates how or what they could afford in terms of price and how that compares to the actual price on the market at that time. So that chart you see below, so the dark blue line represents the median home price since 2012 to 2022. And the other lines reflect the median family incomes, or what could be afforded by the median family income of different household types during that same period. And what we see is that incomes generally have not changed very much, whereas prices have. And so the gap between what can be afforded has widened quite noticeably. From 2012 to 2016, the relationship was quite similar, so there wasn't really much changing. But since prices were rising by 54% from 2016 to 2019, that gap began to increase much more, and then once again increasing quite considerably onwards. So Cumberland, all in all, is unfortunately becoming increasingly unaffordable. When we're talking about renting, unfortunately, we don't have nearly as great data to use in order to reflect or represent what's occurring locally, because the Village of Cumberland isn't covered by the CMHC rental market survey. That said, we can use some information from local communities or adjacent communities to kind of create an understanding of what may be occurring locally. So for instance, since 2013, in the Courtenay census agglomeration, which is the city of Courtenay plus some commuter sheds around it, the rental vacancy rate has been less than 3%. The healthy range is between 3 to 5%. Anything below means that there is a rental deficit, or in other words, there's less availability. Prices increase as landlords, have greater competition in the market from tenants. So a lot of tenants are competing with each other and driving up prices, is what I meant to say. And while this is occurring in Courtenay, or the Courtenay census agglomeration, when folks are not able to find housing in their community, what they do is look for alternatives. And that means they start to move further outward and further outward, which includes looking in the village of Cumberland. And so if a vacancy in a local adjacent community is going down, usually over time, what that means is that adjacent communities, such as Cumberland, will also go down over time, which means that, and what you've probably seen happening locally, is that rental prices in Cumberland are increasing. So this is what's been occurring most recently, but how does that relate to the change in population and overall the change in demand coming from that population? Well, in 2021, Cumberland had about 4,655 residents, and this is up 19% from 2016. Quite a considerable change relative to most communities across British Columbia. And projections suggest that actually this may increase to 6,660 people by 2041, which is a 43% increase, or an additional 2,005 people. For those who remember the last presentation, the numbers that were presented were 2023 and then 5-year increments from there. Since then, when we received the new methodology for the housing demand calculations, they use a baseline of 2021. So we've realigned all of our, current and historical years to fit with 2021 and 5 years from there. So any projections you will see will be, let's say the 5 years from 2021 to 2026, and the 20-year is from 2021 to 2041, unlike what we had before being 2023 to 2043. I say that just for clarification in case anyone is noticing that. In terms of regional population change, so the CVRD had about 71,300 residents in 2021. There's an asterisk on residents because as part of the scope of work for this project, or at least the project for the CVRD, it does not include the Denman and Hornby Island Trust areas. And so in actuality, the CVRD's population would be a little bit larger than that. And projections suggest that the regional population may grow by another 30% over the next 2 decades to 92,790, which is equal to about 21,490 new people. And so the big takeaway from this is that there's an anticipation that Cumberland is going to grow faster than the region overall. So where's the source of this change? Well, growth trends are largely driven by interest from outside the CVRD to move to the CVRD, enough so to offset natural population losses. So if you look at the chart below, the dark blue represents the net difference between births and deaths. And so what we see with an aging population, the trend is that generally we are losing population from those natural changes. But all the other colors, for the most part, being orange, red, and green, represent in-migration. So whether it's people coming from other places in British Columbia, other places in Canada, or even internationally. And so a lot of the folks, or a lot of the growth happening regionally is occurring because of this in-migration. And so higher shares of this in-migration are directed towards the CVRD's municipalities, which includes the village of Cumberland. To illustrate, using 2021 census data, about 10% of Cumberland's population in 2021 had not lived in Cumberland 1 year prior. with the greatest portion arriving from elsewhere in British Columbia, being 6%. A little bit of a disclaimer here is that this does include folks who are moving from other communities of the CVRD. So the amount moving from other parts of British Columbia that are not CVRD might be lower than this. So this is how the population has changed and what we anticipate it's going to look like in the future in terms of total numbers. But what does that mean in terms of actual dwelling demand by 2041? Well, as I mentioned, we are now required to use the new provincial H&R method, so the Housing Needs Report method. And the method estimates the total number of housing units required over 5 and 20-year timeframes. It is made up of 6 components. And for these, I won't go into great detail. So if you have questions, I'm more than happy to answer them after this. As well, there's going to be more detail in the report that you receive. But generally, what it means is that the components are that we need units to address extreme core housing need. So those folks who are most vulnerable in the community, as well as units to address homelessness, units to address suppressed households, anticipated growth, vacancy, and then finally what the province refers to as the demand buffer. And so in total, by 2041, the Village of Cumberland may need to meet a demand of 1,350 new units. There is a 5-year projection, obviously, and that would be about 358 units. Important to note, though, that recent talks with the province indicate that this 5-year projection, which seems relatively close, is more of a legacy item. So as part of the previous iteration of the legislation, we were required to do 5-year projections. And so since now there's that change, they kept that in as a transition piece. So the more important piece is looking at that 20-year projection. So how does this look across the CVRD? In total, in the next 20 years, there may be a need of 17,750 new units across Comox Valley. And while Cumberland's number might seem smaller in terms of the kind of like other communities of the CVRD, important obviously for context, Cumberland is one of the smaller in terms of its population base. And in actuality, proportionally, it is looking at a higher demand output over the next 20 years than most of the other communities. Not by considerable margins, but it is keeping pace or even pushing the pace in terms of what is demanded. Another part of the analysis that's required to be done as part of Housing Needs Report, but it's not a prescribed methodology, is demonstrating how that total unit demand may look in terms of distribution of unit sizes, housing forms, and tenures. So the chart that you have below, what's doing is summarizing the different housing forms that we've defined, being market housing, affordable below market housing, and deeply affordable housing. And for each of those, providing how units might distribute relative to size. So whether it's a 0 1-bedroom unit, 2-bedroom unit, 3-bedroom unit, or 4+ bedroom unit. The important takeaway from this table is while there's going to be a demand over the next 20 years of 1,350 units, potentially, most of that is going to be covered most likely by the market. So estimates suggest that it might be about 990. But importantly, because there are many members of the Village of Cumberland who are of low and very low incomes, or those who are the most vulnerable and need support in accessing or paying for housing, there is still quite a notable amount of demand that would likely be in the form of affordable and below market housing and deeply affordable housing, looking at upwards of 360 in total for those. So non-market interventions are likely going to be necessary. So key takeaways from this, the obvious one is that prices are increasing and regional vacancy is low. So there's not a lot of availability while demand is high, which leads to increasing prices. That said, while the increase can largely be attributed to local supply and demand dynamics, as I just mentioned, a notable portion is also due to factors outside of communities' control. The times during the pandemic when we had the fluctuation in interest rates, which led to increase in demand and increased prices, and then following that with increase in interest rates, which made those mortgages even less affordable. That's not within the control of the municipalities, obviously. But what is largely within control of local communities is their capacity to be flexible in the provision of several forms of housing. So providing many forms of housing and making it easier to provide many forms of housing. However, regardless of how much is built, there will continue to be many households that cannot afford housing. So those folks of lower incomes or those most vulnerable. And so non-market interventions are increasingly necessary to equitably house residents. And in many ways, tackling those parts, being the non-market interventions, is at a regional approach. And so with that, I thank you for your time and listening to me yet again. If you have any questions, I open the floor.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Questions, anyone? Go ahead, Councillor Tyrion.
Hi, thank you for that. I've just got a couple of questions. It looks like Cumberland, the rate of demand is higher than anywhere else in the CVRD. How do you come up with that number? Is that based on past performances or?
So are you referencing when I mentioned proportionally?
Yes.
So that one is a basic comparison of new demand relative to the total population at that time. So like proportionally, how much of, so number of dwellings demanded divided by the total population to see just generally how they relate to each other. And so that relationship is a little bit higher for Cumberland than it would be for other communities in the Comox Valley Regional District. So it's a very simple math sort of thing, just more for just a kind of a little clarity or
but how do you arrive at the conclusion that more people are going to want to live here than in Lazo? Like, I'm just curious as to what's the basis for the conclusion.
Is it the rate of our growth?
So it is a combination of the rate of growth. It is a combination of, for municipalities generally, there are higher numbers of amenities, services. So the demand to be in those areas where there's access to those amenities is greater. In addition to that, there's also support from provincial projections that indicate that there's going to be elevated growth for Cumberland. And that's looking at growth not only in certain age demographics, but across the board for age cohorts, whether it's senior populations or family age populations.
Okay. And then one other question. That 360 units of non-market housing we need over the next 20 years, that's about 25% of the, just under 25% of the total number of units, somewhere between 20 and 25%. Is this common across the CVRD, the island, the province? You guys are, I assume you guys are doing these reports all over the place. Is this a pretty common number?
I would say so, yes. And I would say it's a pretty common number across Canada. And it's less so, let me rephrase. The reason for it is, so we've been divesting or not investing nearly enough in that non-market housing portion of our housing inventory since about the 1980s. And so with that decreasing amount of support, historically, now matched with these considerable affordability challenges, several communities, if not most communities across Canada, are faced with a situation where truly the only way to meet the needs of much of their population is to support them through non-market efforts. Because what's coming online these days in terms of units is well above I guess the amount that they can afford, whether it's home ownership or renting.
Okay. Yep. I guess I just hope the senior levels of government are paying attention to these reports as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're all doing them and they're all getting them. So, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just had a question. When you're looking at, obviously, there's a number of tools at our disposal to take a market intervention approach. But is there, based upon other centers, is there something that stands out that's been more successful than others? That, especially at the what is it? Not just affordable housing or slightly below, but really that deep discount approach. What's been the most effective way of dealing with that you've seen?
So I would say the most effective that I've seen, and it would be in a little different context because it would be here on the East Coast, actually in St. John's, Newfoundland, is, and they benefited a little bit that they started early. We're a little behind on the East Coast relative to all the pressures that the West Coast is facing. And what the biggest positive for them is that they were consistently keeping track of a lot of non-market information, making sure that they kept contact and kept relationships stable between themselves and a lot of the players within the non-market. And then as well, making sure that within their municipality themselves, they were finding ways to support those non-market organizations, because as we're finding in many communities, many provinces, is that there's still a disconnect between local, provincial, and federal levels in terms of funding. And so they, earlier on, I guess, were leading in providing that. So really, the unfortunate answer to that is implementing or assigning resources and funds. And maybe not fortunately, but the best way to go about that would be finding ways to create relationships with provincial and federal partners. That becomes increasingly, well, not increasingly difficult, but it is just difficult. But if there's ways creatively, locally, even just to create those relationships, that's a big start to just a couple years down the road, making it into a bigger solution. You start with the small iterative steps, and then over time, they snowball into something big.
Thank you.
So that's a success I've seen. I know that's not a great answer for a housing shortage that exists very much right now. And I don't know if maybe there's some regional approaches that make sense, but I would leave that to Alana and her team to speak to Cumberland's team.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I said we must be in great shape because we've been doing what you just said for a couple of years or several years now. So any minute now we should be online.
Anybody else?
I would say a lot of it's. I mentioned that Cumberland does have that sustained increase in prices. There's been a lot of demand in Cumberland, and we saw it very much so in our last report as well. But even those communities that were ahead of the game, such as St. John's, the pandemic just kind of threw everything out for a little bit. Like everyone was scrambling. So now, as we're kind of emerging from that, the hope is that all of those strong foundations that were created are going to help come out of it. So now that you have all that data and you're tracking and you're making sure you're maintaining those relationships, I would argue that that's going to help over the next few years for sure.
Fair, thank you.
Yeah. Fingers crossed on that. So my question is around the housing needs report calculator. And if somebody can go back to that slide. Yes. So where does the pit count land in there, and is it even part of this calculation?
It is. So the homelessness component, that's where the pit count would fall under that, but it would be at, so the way the calculation is done is it uses the homelessness figures for the entirety of the CVRD. And what it does is it proportionally allocates that homelessness based off of just the proportion of the population that Cumberland holds relative to the region. So it's a very kind of simple allocation. It doesn't necessarily reflect what might be occurring in reality in Cumberland.
Okay, great. And then my other question on this slide is then what is, if homelessness is obviously people without homes entirely, what is extreme core housing need? It gets worse than homelessness?
No, so homelessness, I would say, is the worst.
Yeah.
Extreme core housing need are those who have been able to respond to the census, but are in and are housed currently, but are in quite dire circumstances in relation to their housing. So core housing need itself, the definition is whether a household is living in a home that is needing major repair, in a home that is overcrowded, or it costs more than 30% of their income to pay for that housing. And then there's an additional element there that they don't have any alternatives in the markets. So it filters for those who choose to live in like more expensive housing. Let's say a young family who buys a larger home, knowing that they'll be able to afford it later. Extreme core housing need, what it does is it changes that 30% metric to 50%. So it's those who are like really paying more than they can on their shelter, and it's leaving very little for other expenses. And so what that means is that they are left in those dire circumstances where even a slight change in their, let's say, income, living situation can put them in quite vulnerable situations. And so we see that in particular, those folks who earn those very low incomes, and very low income is defined as below 20% of the median income for a community. Those are the folks who are most risk of falling or having to live in an unhoused situation.
Okay, thank you. And then the only other thing I wanted to say, and I appreciate the work, and I appreciate the report, and I hope to God that these reports are making a difference for both the province and the federal government. But I just want to note in your slide around what communities, the biggest thing we can do, what is in our control, is to zone for providing flexible housing options. And so we're doing that. But we can do that, and then we sit and wait for a developer to come and provide that housing for us. And then that's sort of the rub. I just want the community to be clear that no matter how we zone our community for what we need, we don't build houses, and so we are dependent on people doing that, for being willing to do that work. And what we find at times is that people in the for-profit housing market would rather build single-family dwellings, large single-family dwellings, and not the housing we need. So just want that to be out there somewhere. And thank you so much.
No, it's a great point. That's a fantastic point.
Anything else, Council? Always good news, Andrew. Thanks so much.
No problem. Hopefully it's a cheerier rest of the
Yes, thank
night.
you. Thank you.
right.
Is Alana coming back, or is that it?
That's all for me, Mayor Brown. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you both for being here. And Council, we have a recommendation to receive that information.
Move receipt.
Second.
Thank you, and all in favor? And any opposed? Thank you. Next is reports, bylaw service review update. Come on up, Courtney, or whoever, everybody. Courtney.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
This is so much better news than the housing needs report.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear it. So the purpose of this report is to provide a summary of the bylaw services review project. Development of a bylaw enforcement strategy is a priority of Council's current strategic plan. And as part of this priority, Council allocated funds for a bylaw service review in this year's budget. The village contracted with Curiositas Consulting to undertake the project, and the contract is now concluded. A lot of work has been completed, and there are several implementation steps for staff to complete. So the bylaw service review project aimed to enhance enforcement activities in Cumberland in alignment with community standards and council direction. The consultants began the project with a council workshop and interviews with staff from several departments who interact with bylaw. And the scope of the project was refined based on these contributor comments and to fit with the available budget. The bylaw service review includes the following 5 parts. Community nuisance abatement bylaw, which was formerly called the Good Neighbor bylaw. Bylaw compliance policy. Bylaw services efficiency review. The bylaw dispute adjudication system, and recommendations for community engagement and education. I'll just briefly go over each of them. So this community nuisance abatement bylaw was adopted by Council in June with great assistance from the consultants as part of this project. It represents the conclusion of a process started 2 years previously, and it was an important step to improve the tools available to the village to address properties creating a significant nuisance that have multiple calls from neighbors. The second part of the project, the bylaw compliance policy, this was adopted by Council in May of this year with great assistance and drafting of it and presentation by the consultants. And it's grounded in trauma-informed principles and intended to foster a culture of respect, inclusion, collaboration, and leadership in the village, guiding compliance and enforcement activities with sensitivity, understanding, and effective community engagement and communication. The third part was the bylaw services efficiency review, and this is less public-facing, more operational. A standard operating procedure for processing calls for service was created. It outlines the process for staff to receive a call for service, often thought of or called a complaint, but we're calling it a call for service. So it goes from receiving this call to documenting the investigation to closing out the file. We were given a host of templates and documents from the consultants to organize our files better, organize our investigation files better. It's been a huge help. And it will help also to better report to council on file volumes and status. The final step of this is to create a digital system to automate and streamline these calls for service. We currently manage the calls through a combination of manual and paper-based processes involving citizens or staff, internal staff submitting complaints in person or via email with information being logged on paper, an Excel spreadsheet, or sometimes a transitory document in between. This current system is challenging and there are inefficiencies, and the potential for lost or misplaced information, lack of transparency and accessibility. So I have some details in the report I won't go into about the technology we're proposing, and we have a quote for the creation of the system and staff training of $15,000, not currently funded. So that's what the recommendation in this report is about, is we have some idea of reallocating funding to do this work. And what the public will see of this is an online form they can fill out on the website with some drop-down boxes so they can fill in different categories and they can submit their information. So we have all their information so we can get in touch with them and ask them follow-up questions and get on investigating this file. And fourth, by the bylaw dispute adjudication system. So this has been planned by the village. Implementing this has been planned for a while, and expenses were budgeted for this year, but council hasn't yet received a report with the bylaw screening policy for adoption. The consultants prepared a draft staff report, screening policy, ready to go, and a ticklet template. Just need some more staff time to be able to take this further and bring it to council. And lastly, they provided recommendations for community engagement and education. This could be a project all on its own. And they left us with some great advice. The contributor feedback emphasized the importance of balancing enforcement with trust building, signaling a move towards more community-focused approach. The consultants advise that through investing in community engagement and education and empowering residents with knowledge about the regulations, the village could enhance voluntary compliance and foster community collaboration and accountability. So they recommended expanding outreach beyond traditional methods of website and council meetings and using digital platforms, community newsletters to reach a broader audience. And they went into some detail about recommendations on educational campaigns, workshops and events, feedback mechanisms, meaning with the public knowing what their channels are to ask and give feedback to the village, training for bylaw enforcement staff and engagement, and then how we should evaluate and adapt this program throughout over time. We've got the bylaw and policy adopted; those are complete. And then, excuse me, standard operating procedures almost are complete. And then there's the request for reallocating funds for this new online system, and that leaves the bylaw offense notification system. So staffing levels in bylaw currently include one bylaw officer at 1 hours a week, and myself, the director, and a small amount of administration support is provided by the development services coordinator on an as needed basis. And the bylaw officer position is currently vacant, so we have bylaw investigations being handled by a contractor, and but the offense notice system and improved data collection require more dedicated time by village staff to implement. So with these constraints in mind, we recommend that if council does reallocate these funds for the data collection and reporting system, that can proceed first, but that we would wait until bylaw officer position is filled before we move further on the bylaw offense notice system. So the recommendation is at the top of the report about reallocating funds from WildSafe coordinator, WildSafe BC coordinator, bylaw offense notice system for 2024, and the use of forestry certification to make up that $15,000.
Thank you so much. Questions, council?
No, very happy to see this report. It's nice to see.
I will say, while we're waiting for questions, I really appreciate and encourage the community to have a look at how this unfolds. And I think what we're trying to create in the community is not a rat out your neighbor system, but when you have a problem and you see someone doing something that's inappropriate, please speak to them first. And that's promoting that culture of respect and inclusion and collaboration. And then when you don't get anywhere with that, then hopefully we have a really convenient online form for you to fill out. But I think that's a really key piece of this service review. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Anybody have questions?
I've got some. I'm just trying to collate them here. Just on the funding of this, so the $5,000 coming out of the bylaw offense notice system, then we're going to be looking at refunding that next year. Is that sort of that was already in the budget for this year, but we're going to be pushing that back to next year's budget?
Yeah, that's right.
And then refunding that next year, okay. And is that similar for the WildSafe BC coordinator funds? What are we losing there?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So both of those are funded annually, and so they're not needing to be refunded. They're already part of your tax
Okay.
base. And so they're just reallocating this year towards the online forms, but next year they'll be operating again. But you do have a chance to pull them from the tax base next year if you don't want to fund them, but if you don't need to add them again.
Okay, so what
We
is
just
that?
didn't use them this year.
Okay, so what is that WildSafe money usually used for then?
So that is money that the BC WildSafe
WildSafe BC.
WildSafe BC, they have a grant program, and if we are able to apply for that, it funds a WildSafe coordinator, And then if we add $8,000 towards it, then it increases our chances and gives us a better service.
I see. So we just didn't apply for it this year, and we've got the money. Okay.
That's correct, yeah.
And then when is the education and engagement portion of this scheduled to take place, and who's going to be doing that, and is that our new comms officer?
Oh, I can go ahead. Look at once we're fully staffed, then we are going to begin implementing this, but some of it will involve bringing information back to council or a future year budget request.
Okay. Okay. And I figured out what BON is, bylaw
Okay.
adoption notices. Okay. And then I had something else here. I'll let somebody else go ahead, and if I can come back to this. If anybody else had anything.
Okay, I'll ask another one. So we've had some chatter in social media around encampments or unhoused folks in the community. Where on the little triangle would that lay? Is that bylaw? Is that RCMP? Does it depend on the situation? Where should people be reporting that?
Yes, it really does depend on the situation, and it can be difficult to figure out at times for the general public. For us, it's if there's a bylaw that is being contravened, then that's something we can follow up on. So, for example, maybe parking, if there'd be a parking bylaw infraction,
Right.
Or a nuisance property infraction, and it is really important to follow up on these when they are related to our bylaws, and we do. And often it could be a case where the RCMP should be called instead of bylaw.
Thanks.
Just a question: how tightly will the new system there be integrated with our financial system? Just ensure the fines get passed along and put on the property. That's obviously a part of this, and I assume the contractor here is Alpha. They'll be doing the work, is it?
That's
Or
right.
am I allowed to say that? It just says our IT contractor.
I think
so
so,
assume-
yes. Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
And actually, we're not planning it does not integrate currently with, it wouldn't integrate with our financial system from the outset. And I'm actually not clear on what we would need to do to make it that way. That wasn't part of the scope.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's the nerd in me. Sorry.
The techie.
No, it's okay. I
You're
think my question's
Right,
been
I'll move
answered.
the
Thank you.
council reallocate $9,000 from the WildSafe BC coordinator budget, $5,000 from the bylaw offense notice budget, system budget, and $1,100 from the use of force recertification budget to create an improved data collection and reporting system for the bylaw service.
Second.
Second, all in favor? None opposed, and that's carried. Thank you very much. And we're on to CMHC Housing Accelerator Fund application. Carry on, Courtney.
Okay, so the purpose of this report is to provide information and seek council endorsement of the village's application to the Housing Accelerator Fund Round 2, administered by CMHC. The application, it's due on next Friday, and as you may or may not recall, I did bring a report to your last council meeting, which was way back in July, that we just received notice that this is open again. Can we please have your direction to start preparing an application, which we did. And now it's due on Friday. So this report will give you some more information about the content of the application. It includes 5 initiatives to accelerate new housing supply, referred to as the Action Plan. In the 2023 intake, the village applied but didn't receive any funding. The new Action Plan is based on our previous application but updated to reflect new program criteria, new best practices provided by CMHC and our current work program. And the funding in this second round, interestingly, is only available to those who applied in the first round but didn't get funded. So that kind of good news. It reduces the potential number of applicants, but there still is quite a lot out there. So the funding would be used to accelerate the housing supply to meet the current housing need as identified in their housing needs report. Now, if you are following along in the report, I'm at the bottom of page 1, and I have a couple of updates to the numbers. You don't have to if you weren't. But so in here in the report, this was written before we received the final housing needs report from the consultant you just heard the presentation of. So the projected housing need shown in my staff report is 1,055 units by 2043, but we actually know that that's 1,350 based on the new methodology. And the other thing is that I have said here, well, I will tell you that the 5-year average of new units we've been creating per year in Cumberland is 55. The report says 45, and I didn't get that updated information soon enough to make it for the agenda. So 55 units over 20 years is 1,100 units. So we still are falling short of our current projected housing need. So if we continue to build at the same pace. The Housing Accelerator Fund program the plan that we have, the action plan that we have prepared for Cumberland is about accelerating bridging the gap between what we know is needed and what the status quo is. And also by undertaking programs that we are already contemplating, already underway or planned. The action plan aligns with several of Council's strategic priorities. And in addition to the funding, I'm going to call it half, Housing Accelerator Fund, the half funding can be used to actually do the projects that I'll talk about in a minute. But there's quite a bit more funding that will come for infrastructure, supporting affordable housing, acquiring land, constructing amenities. Okay, so, and the way we're crunching the numbers with the application so far, we expect to be applying for about $3.5 million. So, just briefly go through the 5 actions. So, development approvals, process modernization. This is building on phase 1 and phase 2 that we have already done. And phase 3 will continue this important work and focusing on e-permitting, staff training, software updates. The Affordable Housing Program, this is supporting incentive programs and support priority housing developments. This is like below market. We can use a portion of the funding as seed funding in our new Affordable Housing Fund that can help support nonprofit societies in doing these projects, for example. The third one is 4-unit as of right zoning bylaw update. This is the same as the provincial SSMUH, the SMU, which we've talked about, which is requiring pre-zoning for up to 4 units on residential properties. Because we weren't required to do that yet, we can use this as a half action. This is something it's already like in the schedule. The half money would allow us to do it with more resources and on a better timeline. Missing Middle Fast Track Incentive Program, it supports this 4-plex zoning, so we can pre-zone, but this is also going to help, the mayor, you said earlier, we don't build the housing, so this will help encourage people to do it more quickly once we actually set the table for them with the zoning. And just a note here, I talked about pre-reviewed building plans. We want to look at adopting a fast-track building permit process for them, and I say we're expecting them soon. The provincial design guide was released last week, if you haven't heard.
Yep,
Yeah, okay, you've all heard, great.
I've seen it though.
And the last is the Village Lands Housing Strategy framework for acquisition and disposition of village lands to support development of priority housing projects. And I think, the next report on your agenda is about Second Street housing, and this is connected with that, like the 23 or more units that can be created in that housing could go towards our commitment to the Housing Accelerator Fund units that we're talking about building. So half funding can be used for a consultant or contract position to manage the program and work on the projects. That is fully fundable. So the recommendation is that council support the village's half application and includes the initiative as generally outlined in this report, with the additional documentation to be prepared and sent to CMHC, and that you, council, authorize the CAO to enter into any contribution agreements or amending agreements that may be required should we be approved. And we're expecting to be, well, they tell us by the end of this calendar year.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Questions, council?
I'm sorry, what was the
Thank
last?
you.
We expect to hear by the end of this calendar
Whether
year
we get
who's
it.
been funded.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
that's reasonably quick, and was one of my questions. So the housing needs report that we just had showed that we're supposed to have 358 units by 2026. Have we built the 216 units of that already from when was it, 2021 till now?
So 21, 22, well, 50, I can count
Oh,
3
yeah,
years.
that's 50.
55 times 3 is about 165. That's on average. I don't have the
Yeah,
numbers straight in front
okay.
of me, but the average, so what's
So
that?
we're short.
So we're
We're
short.
already
We're already
behind.
short.
And then, so this housing, so the fund wants us to build housing at a quicker rate than that?
That's right. So I think did I write that down here? So, right, if we were to, oh my goodness, I have another note here.
So over the next, like the housing needs is showing us needing about a little over 300 units every 4 years. Is
So almost double what we're
almost
currently.
double what we're
Yeah.
currently doing.
So,
And then we've got to do, and then this wants us to do even more than that?
thank you for the question. I had some other notes in my report that have disappeared. So I'll do my best here. So what we are, and these numbers might tweak a little bit by the time we submit the application, but right now, over the 3 years that we commit to for the Housing Accelerator Fund, our business as usual would be 165 units.
Right.
Yeah, that jives with what the
And-
housing needs is showing.
With the Housing Accelerator Fund, we believe we would be able to supply, or there would be building permits for 246. So that's,
In 3 years.
so instead of like 55 per year, it's like 82 per year over each of the 3 years.
And then of that 82 per year, with these funds, how many, what portion of that could we expect to be affordable in the affordable category?
Was that up to us to set?
Well, I mean, it would be how we use those funds would be a big part of it.
Yeah, I think that what we're trying to, so, yeah. I think that some would definitely be affordable. Okay, I do have this number. Right now, nope. We really want to provide more housing, and we're trying to imagine what is going to be likely in 3 years. So we're projecting 13% is affordable over what our commitment is. So yes, it does fall short of that 25%.
Okay, but it's not zero.
And by comparison, we're saying business as usual would be 5%.
Yeah.
Would possibly be affordable.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So then following that question, is there, I don't see anywhere where they're giving us like a human to do that work, because right now we're sort of maxed out at 55 units a year. So who's going to do that work?
Yeah. Well, they are, if hopefully, giving us plenty of money, so we can
Okay.
staff up for that.
Okay, and that's allowed in the
Yes.
program?
Yes.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Okay. Great. Thank you. Any other questions? What happens
I
if
will
we
ask
don't?
later.
So I think where Councillor Tyrion, if I may, and also a concern of mine is we're experiencing a rapid rate of growth, and we have been, like our housing needs report just told us we're not only the need has gone up, but the cost has gone up and yada, yada. But we've also had a huge population increase and a whole bunch of growth. And so now we're saying, okay, now we're going to accelerate that growth, because the province wants us to do that, and I agree that we need more affordable housing. If we don't build, like if we say, I don't know how we would manage that, but if we just said, we're just going to build affordable housing, come to us, this is what we're going to use the money for to facilitate that process, and we didn't build a whole bunch of market housing or something like that, like what's the consequence? We give that money back? Do we, if we don't hit the growth target that they're hoping we grow at?
Yeah, that's right. I think that if we don't meet it, so the funding is given to us in 3 installments.
Okay.
And so we have to show progress at each of those milestones, and if we don't, then we won't get that funding.
And the funding is for the 5 items.
That's correct.
So whether
Yeah.
or not those houses actually get built is not necessarily our responsibility. We're going to set the stage with those 5 tools, or 5, whatever we called them.
Yeah.
And that's our job. That's
Yes
what we
and
do
no.
with the money.
And I think it's a little bit not crystal clear. It's probably not even crystal clear to CMHC. I understand that it's really in that last year, the 4th year, where they very well may withhold that 4th payment
If
if
we're
you're
not.
really falling short of the housing that you said you'd provide.
Okay.
But I also hear that maybe there's going to be extensions. They really they want the housing to be built, but they also don't want municipalities to not try,
Right.
or to not have realistic goals.
Right.
So no one in the first round has gotten to your year 4 yet, so we don't really know.
Yeah.
I would also say that this is I think a realistic plan based on what we think market absorption might be in the next. It's a very short timeline, really. But some of the programs are going to set us up for housing units in further years that I think would lean more towards the affordable. Like the whole project about municipal lands, municipally owned lands, there's so much opportunity what we can do there, but I don't think we can achieve many units in the term of the half. So we can use that funding to set the stage with that project, maybe get some units, but then later on is maybe where council is going to have more control to have more affordable units built.
Because we could say service those lots, or zone the lots, or provide plans
Yeah.
for the lots, or whatever, in order to encourage the development of those projects that we like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think. I think CMHC would be quite understanding, because there's also a capacity issue for building those. If there's only so many construction companies, so much that you can pull, and the labor force to pull in, that if you don't get all the houses built, but you set ourselves up for a good framework for continuing, I can see this being they're not going to throw away all that money just to say, oh, you haven't quite got to that perfect level. So I don't see any downside in going for this.
Especially if it helps us get the Second Street housing.
One more question.
Yes.
Was there any indication from, I guess it's probably not CMHC, but from other levels of the senior government, that they're going to also fund the necessary infrastructure to go along with all of these extra residents? We need to provide them water. We need recreation space for them. We're getting an upgrade to the school, but if we're growing this fast, that will be full very quickly, et cetera, et cetera. We can't. There's more to this than just building houses. And has there been any indication that funding will also be passed along?
No, I haven't seen any hand out the dollars kind of funding, new programs. But what we have seen is the province enabling local governments to fund things differently, like with new categories for DCCs, the amenity cost charge bylaw, our ability to get additional road width without waiting for subdivision for parklets, for example. So that's what I have seen.
Okay.
And we did see that infrastructure fund come however many, 2 years ago, whatever. And and I think municipalities very much went back to that ministry and said, we need more, we need that
We need
every
that
year.
every
So, you know, it is an election year, so let's just keep saying that.
Depends how many elections there are federally and provincially in the next few years.
That could also change things dramatically, yes. So there's a recommendation there. If someone's willing to read that.
I move that council support the village's Housing Accelerator Fund action plan that includes the initiatives as generally outlined in the staff report dated September 9th, 2024, with additional required documentation to the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation as the village's application under the Housing Accelerator Fund program, round 2, and that council authorize the chief administrative officer to enter into any contribution agreements or amending agreements that may be required should the village be approved for funding under the program.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? And that's carried. And now we're on to, wow, it's all you, Courtney. 3345 Second Street Housing Report. Yes, do sit.
Yes.
Oh, it's Michelle.
It is me. However, I do have to rely heavily on Courtney because I am not a planner.
Yeah.
So basically, the village has a lease with Vancouver Island Health Authority for the land located at 3345 Second Street, and this lease is for affordable housing purposes. It's also, the lease is subject to that it has to begin construction by June 28, 2025. However, if things were to be able to move forward, I'm sure we could work with VHA on some extensions. We'd talk to them. Or any future proponent would. There's also a zoning in place for the property that took place a couple of years or a year ago or something, and a development permit has been issued. However, if construction doesn't begin again by September of 2025, then that will need to be reapplied for. So what the case is that Comox Valley Transition Society was the proponent for this affordable housing. They did all of that work to work with planning staff to bring forward the zoning, the rezoning, and put in 2 grant applications to the Community Housing Fund for funding, and those 2 submissions were not successful. And so following that, the Transition Society did, after putting in significant investment, to give notice that they wouldn't be proceeding as the proponent any longer. So now that leaves the Village of Cumberland as the only organization at this point to formally have a lease on the land for affordable housing. There is nobody else involved, no other agreements with any other organizations. And so to that end, Wiser Projects had been working with Comox Valley Transition Society on all of this development and working with them. So what staff did was we engaged Wiser Projects to explore some different options of what was available to the village, with us being the only people on the land lease. And so after this analysis took place, so staff then went and explored the possibility of adding a 4th story to the building in order to increase the likelihood of a grant, a successful grant, because there's another intake for the housing fund in the new year. So we've explored that, and you'll further see in the report the information that would be needed to be able to do that. We also explored the possibility of how we would need to establish a new proponent and an operator for the housing. We also had a few discussions with BC Housing regarding the Community Housing Fund, just to help out in the event that we put another application in. And we also had discussions with BC Builds, just to sort of understand what alternatives might exist if our housing application were to not be successful. And so So the zoning information is provided to you in this public council report, and then given the sensitivity of information for future negotiations that would need to take place with a third party organization to obtain funding and build and operate and develop, that information is provided in a closed meeting for you. So we're dealing with the zoning in this report, and then we'll deal with the other stuff in it. And then we will come public actually at a different time with that information. And so, and this is where I'm going to need Courtney's help. But really, all of the information is here in the report of what we're going to need to do to add a fourth story. It involves a zoning bylaw amendment, and what I can see as one of the bigger impacts to that is you had already given a parking variance to this property, so likely you're going to need to look at the parking again because it's tight, and you'll need more if you add another floor. Courtney, do you have anything else? Yeah, does that sound good? Essentially, we have a consultant doing this work for us so that we can help the capacity that's in-house. And so staff is recommending that council asks staff to bring back a zoning bylaw to add that fourth floor to give us a better chance at if you are able to get another proponent, a better chance at the grant.
Okay, thank you. Questions, council?
I already know the answer, but is there any way we can apply as a 3-story and then or as a 4-story?
Yes. So
Maybe I don't know the answer.
we wouldn't actually apply as a 3-story. I think what we would do is, as we move forward through the process, because the grant application is coming up so quickly, we would likely deal with the 3rd-story process that we've gone through so far, and then what we would do is just provide details on the 4-story and how we could get there. And it's not ideal, but if that has to happen, we would. And that would then still let them know that basically with BC Housing, they want to know that if they did approve the funding, that we could start right away. And so we just have to prove that.
So we could put on the application, this is 3 or 4 if, yeah.
Oh, 3 or 4 is what you're asking.
No.
Sorry, no. Yeah, no, sorry, I didn't realize that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we would need to say we're applying for, yeah.
They basically, what the feedback from BC Housing was very strongly, so it's all weighted.
Yeah.
And so if you've got a building permit and your plans and everything is complete, then your operator and all of your ducks are in a perfect row, that's when you get the funding. And so.
Or not.
Right.
Totally.
But our ducks have not yet been entirely
I thought we were
in
last
the
year.
row. I think there was, some of the
Anyway.
things were ranked a bit lower than, yeah.
A
there were
building
certain
permit
areas
is a
where
big
we were
one.
weaker. Yeah,
Getting a building permit.
yeah. And so, well, that's my questions. Yes. you wanna-
So maybe just to add
Yeah.
that maybe a good piece of information is that it wasn't until this spring when the CVTS was notified they didn't receive the second round community housing fund. They did get project development funding at that time, around $250,000. And with that funding, that is enough, more than enough, to prepare building permit ready drawings. So that is that hasn't been done to date. Yeah. So that if building permit ready drawings can be prepared before the application, and the building permit issued, then it truly is shovel ready, which was definitely not to that level before.
Yeah. Question?
But this is kind of getting into the nitty gritty of it, and it's obviously a little bit early. Has there been some consideration to the shading to other properties by adding another story or anything like that? I know that's come up with residents in that particular area, and
Actually, I think that the consultant already mentioned that we have working with us, that will be important reason to engage with the neighbors in the revised development permit Well, we're for the rezoning. That's an important topic to engage with the
Yeah.
neighborhood on for the rezoning, to add to a fourth story.
Is it possible, just the nature of the site, is it possible to have like a 3.5 story where the fourth story is somewhat set back? You know, it would, which may alleviate some of the concerns of the residents in that area.
I did note in the, that the housing is already shifted far away from the
Yeah.
sort of single family, as far away as it can be, to reduce the conflict or the shading in that way. Yeah.
So, would this zoning just be for this lot? Or are there other RM4 lots in town that,
It is the only one.
it's the only one, so the zoning would be specific for this lot?
That's right.
Okay, good. The parking, I'm gonna mention it again. Would parking like this, this would be another good opportunity where we might have to look at the idea of a car share. If we could provide 2 cars as part of the project that the residents can share, that could go a long ways towards making the parking situation much more palatable. And then if we could do that with other developments around town that come on that are in need of parking, perhaps we could get a car share network up and running here in town. I don't know, maybe somebody out there wants to
Is
start
listening.
a nonprofit car share network, please. Yeah, so just an idea for that, if that becomes a sticking point.
Any other?
Time when we talk about whether it's 3 or 4 stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you direct us at this meeting, if you want to come back to
We didn't
with the
receive
zoning.
did we receive particular information that is why we didn't receive it? I guess because we weren't totally ready is one of the things, but like was the, I feel like they've mentioned that the size was not ideal already.
Yeah.
But
The more units, the stronger your application, absolutely.
I think if we added the 4th floor, they would know that from last year and see how hard we're trying.
Well,
Yeah.
definitely.
There was some indication, like absolutely no indication that there was that would be favorable or whatever. But when I did talk about it in the meeting, it was like, well, yeah, of course, that would be, yeah. So, but not really any indication that it would be successful or anything.
Just a question on the parking front, and has there been any engagement with VHOT to perhaps lease some of the parking space in the hospital next door, which may, you know, it's rarely full there. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen it full, and even to have, you know, 4 or 5 spaces would go a long way to alleviating some of the residents' concerns over parking. And it would be favorable probably for VHOT because that's unused space at the moment that I see there.
That's a good idea.
No, I don't think that has been discussed with them before.
Yeah,
So we'll
I think it's something to consider.
And we do have to engage VHA
Yeah.
anyway on the lease. So
Maybe throw it
Make
out there
note.
and see what they'd be
Yep.
willing to give up for leasing space.
That's what I was going to say. Maybe some creative parking solutions with VHA, particularly for their 4 employee units, even if they provided those 4 parking spots. That would be very helpful. And then I think we want to stick with there's 2 options in the zoning that you've presented us around changing I can't remember what it is. Anyway, I'm in favor.
Density.
Yeah, so I'm in favor of keeping the RM4 zone, and using this zone as a tool to get more affordable housing in the future. My only concern around that is that I believe in the zone, if I'm reading this correctly, that it's the housing, it says that a minimum of 20% of the housing in that zone needs to be affordable. Did I read that right, or did I read that wrong?
Yep,
Yeah, you read the density bonus.
20% of units
Because we know
affordable.
these are all, except for the 4, these are all affordable. So I wonder if we need to increase that percentage. for that zone.
Yeah, we'll have to take that back and have a look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Tyrion, did you have something?
Yeah, did you say that this zoning change would have to come back for some public consultation, or there would be an invitation for public comment, or how exactly would that work?
Yes, I think we have something in here about consultation with the neighbors.
So is it just neighbors that are invited to? Okay.
A public hearing isn't required, and any consultation would be at the discretion of council. So you can think about any particular type of public consultation you would like to see.
We could do a neighborhood information session or something.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, personally, I'm in favor of going to the 4-story. This is, as we saw from the last report, badly needed housing, and it's going to be majority affordable housing, and I feel like we should do everything we can to try and get this over the finish line, as it were.
And given that we have this funding round coming, and depending on what happens with the election, potentially not more funding happening, as well as the deadlines that we have on the lease and the deadline on the DP, I think whatever we can do to get this application to a place where they're most likely to fund it is what we need to do. And we have that $250,000 to help us do that, hopefully. So, yeah, I'm happy to.
I still think we need some public consultation
Oh,
on it too,
absolutely.
'cause, I mean, it's going to be the high point in Cumberland as well, so.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
but
think-
it's all, the thing about the site that reassures me around that is that the trees on the site are taller than this building.
Yeah,
So there's already that height there, and there's already that shade there.
yeah.
So it's shifting that, obviously, from trees to housing is a completely different situation, but it just softens that impact, I think,
Yeah.
to some extent, hopefully, for the neighbors. But yes, I'm anxious to hear
And I
from them
believe
as
the
well.
design keeps most of the trees on the site.
On the front side, I think,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
And then just to clarify, we're still waiting to hear about the,
the 250,000, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, okay. So there's a recommendation there, council?
Move the council direct staff to bring back a zoning amendment bylaw to allow for a 4th floor in the zone for the 3345 Second Street affordable housing development.
Second.
All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Council member monthly reports are in our package if anyone has questions about anything. Congratulations.
Thank you. That's what happens when I get a vacation.
You get to work more?
So if there's no questions about those, we'll move on to bylaws. 2024-2028 financial plan amendment bylaw. How much did we mess with that budget?
Sorry, I think the permissive, I think you
Perm-
need
oh,
to
we're-
adopt
oh,
the
I
permissive
skipped
first.
one.
Yeah.
Okay, permissive tax exemption first. Thank you, Annie. Thank you, Michelle. Keep me on track.
Oh, just adopt it?
Yeah.
I can do that.
Sure, do it.
I'll move that council adopt the permissive tax exemption 2025 bylaw number 1213, 2024.
Second.
All in favor? And any opposed? Nope, carried. Okay, now we're on financial plan amendment bylaw.
So the purpose of this report is to present amendments to the 2024-2028 financial plan approved in January and to request that council consider the first 3 readings of the amendment bylaw. Proposed amendments are presented in 3 attachments to this report and includes the project carried forward from 2024, council motions with financial implication for the year 2024, and staff recommended amendments. And the amendments for council motions presented as the attachment number 3 Staff recommend changing the source of funding for the additional work approved for the First Street sidewalks. Council approve using LGCAP, the Local Government Climate Action Program, to fund the additional work. And since then, the federal government has confirmed the renewal of the Canada Community Building Funds for a 10-year period. As this source of funding represents more money and is less restricted than LGCAP, staff recommend using community building funds toward the First Street additional work and keep the LGCAP funding available for new initiative supporting of the Climate Action Plan. Attachment 4 presents the use of the funding for contingency and grants approved in 2024. It also includes staff recommended amendments of allocating the unused carbon offset funds to supplement the LGCAP reserve, allocating the budget earmark for the possible IT service transition to increase the IT services budget for the year, adding the amortization for the fire hall, which was missed in the financial plan, and adding the amortization and accretion expense for the asset retirement obligation, which is a new standard that came into effect in 2023. Another financial plan bylaw amendment will be brought forward in December to recommend final adjustment to the budget as needed. And for now, staff recommend council to proceed with the first 3 readings of the 2024-2028 financial plan amendment, bylaw number 1214, 2024. Any question?
Thank you so much.
I'll move that council give first, second, and third reading to the 2024-2028 financial plan amendment bylaw number 1214, 2024.
Second.
All in favor? And that is carried unanimously as well. Okay, so next is notices, motions, and announcements. And it looks like we're probably having a Heritage Committee meeting at some point. So watch the website for all kinds of interesting information about all kinds of things, including Heritage Committee and other meetings that the village is having, because we don't have a date confirmed. And question period.
Should we
Oops.
also mention that early voting starts tomorrow?
Yes. No, Wednesday.
Wednesday, sorry. Oh, Wednesday, my
So,
bad.
first opportunity to vote is September 11th. Second opportunity to vote, second and final opportunity to vote is September 21st. And there is an all candidates meeting on September 17th. And I don't have any more information about that. Now questions.
The Buchanan Hall.
At the Buchanan Hall,
I think it's at 7:30, but
probably around 7. You'll probably find it on Facebook and our website shortly. Yeah? No, not on our website, only on Facebook. It's because it's not us.
It's a third-party
It's a
event,
third party.
yes.
Okay. So watch Facebook for that announcement, probably the bulletin board. All right, now question period. Questions? From our wild audience there?
Would it be all right if I sat down?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, Ken.
I'm just using my phone because that's where I sent my Word,
Oh,
Word, so I could just read it from the phone instead of having a suitcase of notes. So. Just bear with me. I turned it off so it wouldn't buzz when we're having a meeting. At a certain point, I'll be able to begin without seeing it yet, but. I'll just try and start initially. First of all, thank you, Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to ask one question of an agenda item. Because of that, my question is going to be multifaceted. Lots of ands in the question, but here we go. Not too many of the questions. So, Yes, and it's regarding the agenda item bylaw service review update. Development bylaw services recommendation. So as I said, good evening, Mayor and Council. My name's Ken Barth. Thank you for the opportunity, like I said, to ask one question of the agenda item. Therefore, I have the following question. Okay, the first question is regarding the nuisance abatement bylaw. And the question is, how effective is the nuisance abatement bylaw pertaining to snow-covered sidewalks when it's not being enforced? Which is important because many of the streets have no sidewalks at all, so there pedestrians have to walk on the street with vehicle traffic traveling up to 50 kilometers per hour in both winter and summer, good weather or bad, day or night. And therefore, why not have the nuisance abatement bylaw be driven by enforcement rather than complaint-driven, as was mentioned earlier, which sometimes creates neighbor conflict? I have talked to neighbors and have been yelled at and called an old man for asking them to shovel their sidewalk. So it does create conflict amongst neighbors. Bear with me again, it's because I'm using the phone. And just one thing to note, initially I thought there was a bylaw in terms of snow clearing, sort of specific, because I got it mixed up with the good neighbor policy and some other things which kind of overlap each other. But it has been my experience when I have made a complaint and it was subsequently investigated and did result in a warning for the property owner. I was then, within probably days of getting that person getting the warning, I was accused of being the snitch that snitched on them about their sidewalk. So that's an example about the animosity that can be created by having to complain yourself rather than have the village bylaw officer investigate or proactively check 48 hours after a snowfall to see how many sidewalks are not shoveled. And with that, I look forward to your responses. I don't necessarily expect them tonight, but if not tonight, perhaps a written response.
No, I'm happy to respond. We, as you heard in the report, we have just developed our bylaw compliance, a new bylaw compliance policy. And in the past, has been complaint driven. The reason it is complaint driven and the reason it will remain complaint driven is because we would need an awful lot of capacity to enforce bylaws proactively with staff. And that would cost you and us and our taxpayers an awful lot of money. So I'll leave it at that. That's why. And it is unsatisfying when people can't shovel their walks, but there are many people who are not able to shovel their walks, and I don't think we want to be punishing them, fining them necessarily because they are unable to shovel their walks. I know last year during snowstorms there was a I can't remember what it was called, some kind of good neighbor something where people would offer to come and shovel your walk and you could say, I can't shovel, can somebody come shovel me out? I think that would be an excellent solution or proposition for neighborhoods to do something like that. Everybody chips in and hires a couple of strong kids to help shovel sidewalks. Yeah, I appreciate that you talked to your neighbor first and tried to work something out. You know, I just don't think the village has the capacity to be managing that sort of thing on an ongoing basis.
May I just add one thing?
Sure.
Sort of respond. One of the things with regards to sidewalks, for able-bodied people, you know, they can walk, they can, and there's obviously an emphasis on cars when you talk about parking for new development. But there's seems to be a lack of interest in pedestrian infrastructure, and it does relate to the climate action plan in terms of reducing emissions. Walk to the center of the village, don't drive. And also means you don't need land for parking as much. So, you know, that's why I bring up the issue, because, you know, as a disabled person, I walk here to a meeting, not tonight, I got a ride tonight, but I walk here, and probably 3/4 of the journey is not on a sidewalk, it's actually on the road. And in the winter, you have to walk on the road, and it's still 50 kilometers an hour.
And we completely understand that that is a challenge for people who are not able. And that's why we have invested in an active travel plan. That's why we have infrastructure plans to build sidewalks, but there is no way that we can afford to put sidewalks on every street in Cumberland. They cost a fortune. And again, we need to make very challenging decisions about how we allocate our infrastructure funds. And we have many competing demands. So we're doing the best we can, and I'll just leave it at that. Thanks. Any online questions? Nothing.
No questions by email.
Okay, thank you. So we now need to adjourn to closed session. Could someone please make that recommendation? Thanks, Ken.
Thank you, Ken.
I'll move that council close the meeting to the public pursuant to Section 90 of the Community Charter to consider the acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land or improvements if the council considers that disclosure could reasonably be affected to harm the interests of the municipality.
Second.
All in favor? None opposed? And